everyone. Today I am going to share with you a module that will discuss with you the new APA 7 format for writing student papers. And I just want to introduce myself briefly. My name is Carolyn Gilmore, and I'm a doctoral candidate at Florida State. I'm in the Department of Special Education, and just my background, I'm a speech-language pathologist by my background. And so today the objectives that we want to cover in this module are that you'll be able to identify appropriate writing style and grammar for research papers that you submit. And then you'll be able to identify key elements of the student papers using APA 7 guidelines, and that you'll be able to also kind of identify some of those changes from the APA 6 format to APA 7, especially for in-text and for your reference citations. And then you'll be able to identify some sources that can assist you with your writing and the citing of the work that you will do at FSU. Something else I want you to keep in mind that this module is going to be somewhat interactive, where you'll pause the video to answer some questions that might be embedded, or there are a couple of QR codes that you can scan for some videos that will give you some additional information. And before we really dive in, I just want to say that, you know, if I make an error, please bear with me. I'm not going to stop and try to make it perfect, but we'll do my best to make it through. So as we get started, when we think about what is APA style, and APA is an editorial style that's developed by the American Psychological Association. And for those of us in the education department, these are the rules and guidelines for books, peer-reviewed scientific journals, scholarly written material, research papers, dissertations, and manuscripts that we're going to write while we're in graduate school or in doc programs or even in our undergraduate programs. And so APA format is most commonly used in the social and behavioral sciences. And then there was a recent change, an update from APA 6 to APA 7, and that took place in October of 2019. So that's going to change some of the way that you submit your student papers to your professors. And so when you think about writing a paper, I first wanted to talk to you about writing style. And it's just so important when you submit a paper to your professor that you use clear and concise writing. And this means being really cognizant of not using run-on sentences or trying to throw too many ideas into one sentence. It's better to write short, concise sentences, but not so short that your paper sounds choppy once it's presented. In your writing, you want to make sure that you reduce any bias in the language that you use. Be really sensitive to how people refer to themselves, being sensitive to labels. And it's important to use person-first language, especially when you're thinking about people talking about their age or disability. So you would use the phrases like a child with Down syndrome, not a Downs boy, or a person with a disability, or people who are blind. Sometimes it's also appropriate to use identity first. It just depends on what that group of people tend to call themselves. And an example of that is using the phrase autistic person. You also want to use language that maintains the integrity of the individual or the group of individuals that you're describing. So using the terminology deaf or hard of hearing and not hearing impaired, just being really sensitive to how those labels can impact people. So you want to also avoid condescending terminology, so especially related to people that do have any type of special education needs or any type of disability. You don't want to just use terms like special needs or physically challenged or the elderly or senile. Just be careful with those terms that you use in your papers, and in talking with others. And for those of you that are going to be teachers, it's very important that you're aware of what those appropriate terms are, because these terms can change quickly, and so it's important to stay abreast of what the appropriate terms are when you're describing people or groups of people. And so you also want to be sensitive to one's gender, their sexual orientation, racial and ethnic identity. Again, because these terms can change quite rapidly. You know, as an educator and as a student, it's important that you stay abreast of those changes when they occur. And then when you think about your writing, it's very important that the papers that you submit are written well. And so that means also using punctuation. And so throughout this module, I wanted to kind of highlight common errors that I've made myself as a writer and that I've seen students also make when they submit work. The first is the use of commas. And so you use those commas when you have two separate independent clauses that are joined by a conjunction, like the word and, but, or. And when you think about that, you use that conjunction, you have a comma before the conjunction, and then you have two sentences that really could stand alone, but you're joining them with a comma. And so also, when you set off a non-essential or non-restrictive clause, like in the example, the boots, which were old, still looked shiny. So that which were old phrase is surrounded by commas. And then you also use commas when you have separate items in a series of 3 or more items. And it's important to note, in this example, it says, I bought eggs, bacon, and juice. You do use that comma before the word and. A lot of times that comma is missing. And so another type of punctuation with student papers and professional papers is the use of quotation marks. And it is appropriate to use quotation marks if you're introducing slang or invented terminology, coined terms, or linguistics examples. So if I were describing items on a test and I said the test items included truck, ball, toy, those would be in quotation marks. Another time you use quotation marks is if you're going to quote material or have verbatim instructions to your participants in a research paper. Then it also is important that you do use italics, but you use them appropriately. The use of italics is seen in APA format for the titles of books, periodicals, films, videos, and TV shows. For the volume numbers in your reference list, it's italicized. When you introduce a key term or a technical term, so instead of bolding that or putting it in quotation marks, you would use italics to introduce that term in your paper. For statistical symbols and algebraic variables, and then words that could be misread, something that you want to kind of stand out to your reader. And then it's also very important that you pay attention to your grammar. One thing that you need to try to do, and sometimes it can be difficult depending on the type of paper that you're writing, but to try to use consistent verb tense. So throughout your paper, whether you're going to write your paper using past tense form or present tense, and try to stick to that throughout the entirety of your paper. So you're going to use past tense when you're describing someone's previous work or when you describe what you found in your own research. Present tense is going to be used to describe something that is known to be true, like Tallahassee is the capital of Florida. Be sure that you use active voice instead of passive voice. So an example of that, you would say, the teacher teaches me, not I was taught by the teacher. And so passive voice is used to show interest in the person or object that experiences the action instead of the person or the object performing the action. And so you'll see at the end of the PowerPoint, I'm going to give you some resources that will really help you when you submit a paper. One of those is Grammarly. It is a platform you can submit your paper to, and it really looks for that use of passive voice and helps you, it draws attention to it so that you can rewrite your sentences, because you may get feedback from a professor that says, don't use passive voice, don't use passive voice. Be careful with common homophones, like there and there. So there, T-H-E-R-E, is describing a place. T-H-E-I-R is showing possession. Those are their books. Those are their shoes. Think about to, T-W-O, and T-O-O. T-O is a preposition, like we're going to the store. T-W-O is the numeral that's written. And then T-O-O means also, like I wanted to go to the store too. So be careful when you're writing those in your paper. Think about the difference between using who and whom. Whom is a subjective pronoun. And to check that in your work, you can replace the word who with he or she. And when you replace that word, if it makes sense, then you're using that word appropriately. Whom is an objective pronoun. And if you can replace the word whom with him or her, then you're using that word correctly. So another thing to keep in mind relating to your grammar is your pronoun use. And when you're writing a paper, and if you're referring to yourself, you want to use the first person pronoun I. Don't refer to yourself in third person as the author or the researcher. If you're writing a paper with another author, use that pronoun we. But don't use we just to refer to people in general. Use a specific noun instead. And also the word they. So previously you might have seen work where authors used like he and she, a binary term. Now it is appropriate to use the word they in place of he and she, so that you're not using that binary type of pronoun. And then it's also important, especially if you're writing a research paper and publishing something, that you consult with the participants in your study so that you ensure that you're using the appropriate terminology. And the APA 7 manual goes into great detail about pronoun use. So if you have any questions about what is the most appropriate term to use, that's a good place to really look for those answers. And so another part of your writing style is when you use numbers in text, and we see these errors quite often. When you write numbers 0 to 9, you're going to write those words out. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 9, you're going to spell those words out in written form. You're going to write out numbers of common fractions like 1/4 or 2/3. And definitely you write out the number at the beginning of a sentence. You're not going to just use the numeral. So for numerals of 10 and higher, it is appropriate to use the actual numeral. You're going to use numerals before a unit of measurement like 5 pounds or 2 kilograms. You're going to use numerals to indicate time, age, date, and money. And then you use numerals for mathematical functions, percentages, and ratios. So just be mindful of that, of when it's appropriate to spell out your numbers and then when it's appropriate to use numerals in your paper. And then as far as your student paper, a few things have changed with the APA 7 format. It used to be when you submitted a paper, you would have a running head at the top left of your paper, and it's a shortened, it usually said running head, and then it had a shortened title. That's no longer the case for a student paper. That is still going to be used in a professional paper. And so on your title page, what you're going to see now is just, you're going to have that page number in the upper right corner, and you use that through your headings settings. And then you do boldface your title, and it's centered on your title page. Then it's followed by your name, the university or school that you're affiliated with, the course that you are submitting the paper for, the name of the professor, what they prefer to be called, and then the date of your assignment. And so just be sure that when you do your cover page that it is double spaced, that you use 12-point font Times New Roman. I'm going to mention a couple that APA 7 says are appropriate to also use, but just be mindful of what your professor may require. And then when you do a student paper, be sure that your margins are 1 inch on all sides. Don't try to bring those margins in so that you can write a longer paper. Make sure they are 1 inch. And then when you think about the format of the rest of your paper, again, the body of your paper, when you start the body, your title is going to be in the center and it will be in bold. Then you're going to indent your first paragraph, and then the subsequent paragraphs will also be indented, and you double space all of your pages. Again, you continue to use the 12-point font like Times New Roman, but then APA 7 says that it's also appropriate to use Georgia, Arial, and Calibri. 11-point may be acceptable, but again, refer to what your professor asks you to use. Then on your reference page, you will bold and center the word references at the top of a brand new page. You will double space all of the entries in your reference list. It should be double spaced. The first line of each entry will be to the far left, flush, and then any lines below that entry are going to be indented. And you would do that for each entry. So each new entry with the first line of the entry would be flush left, with any additional lines would be indented. And so when you use headings in your paper, and this you're going to see more common in research papers. These are the different levels of headings that you can use, and the table is here. Level 1, it's going to be center, bold, title case heading, and then the text starts with an indented paragraph. And then you can see how, I'm not going to go through each one, but with each level of heading, you're going to see it's a little bit different. But it is important to note that when you have your introduction section of your paper, you do not use the heading introduction. But any subsections that would follow in your introduction would use a level 2 heading, which means that it's flush left, bold, and title case heading. And then to kind of think about when would you use headings. Again, you don't use that heading for the introduction of your paper. You use the same heading level throughout your paper that have equal importance. And then be sure, if you do use a heading, that it is followed by at least 2 subheadings or none at all. So you wouldn't want just one subheading under a heading. You would want at least 2. And then be sure to use the heading levels that I showed you in the previous slide instead of using any kind of numbers or letters that you might use in an outline. And then when you think about citation, the reason that we use citation is that we have to cite the work of others. We are not able to take anything that somebody has written, their thoughts, their ideas, their findings, and present them as our own. So we certainly don't want to plagiarize the work of others. And plagiarism is using someone else's thoughts, their ideas, their research, and presenting it as your own. And so when we do use someone else's thoughts in our papers, we have to cite those throughout the body of our paper. And then again, we cite that in our reference page. And so citation is needed when that information is directly quoted. Even if we paraphrase it and put it in our own words, we still have to cite that those ideas and those findings came from somebody else. It's not something we generated on our own, or anything that we reference in our research paper. Here you are able to scan the QR code, and it's a brief video about plagiarism and citations. And so for your in-text citation, there have been a few changes, and they're really actually kind of nice. And it depends on the number of authors in the work that you're going to cite. So the two types of citation that you have within the body of your paper are the parenthetical citation or the narrative citation. And so for one author, you're just going to put the author's name and a comma and the year and the parentheses, and then when you're writing it out in a narrative format, you would use the author's name with the date in parentheses. For two authors, you can see the example here. You do list both of the authors with a comma followed by the date, and then the narrative citation would be both authors with the word and followed by the date. Now here's where it changes. In APA 6, when there were 3 or more authors, the first time that you mentioned that piece of work or reference that piece of work, you had to list out all of the authors. So now, instead of doing that, you're able to use et al., which really does kind of save you some time. It's nice. So if there are 3 or more authors, even the first time in your text, you're going to refer to, this was an example of Fixon et al. With a period, comma, followed by the date, or the narrative is Fixon et al. Period, followed by the date in parentheses. And so here's some other examples about like a group author with an abbreviation with your first citation. So if I were going to cite What Works Clearinghouse, I would write that out to begin with, followed by the square brackets, WWC, comma, followed by the date. Subsequent citations, I could abbreviate What Works Clearinghouse with WWC, comma, followed by the date. And it's basically almost the same for the narrative. You would put in the parentheses, you would use the abbreviated form, comma, followed by the date. And so that's one of the major changes from APA 6 to APA 7 regarding the number of authors and how you would cite that within the body of your paper. And so when we think about paraphrasing, I wanted to touch base on this. Paraphrasing is when you restate another person's ideas in your own words. Now, this doesn't mean just changing 1 or 2 words in a sentence. It really is trying to capture that thought and rephrase what the author is saying. And even if you do paraphrase something, you must cite your work either using that narrative or parenthetical format. Even when you synthesize ideas from several authors, you must cite all of those sources. So an example would be here, like the Rush and Sheldon and the date of their publication, followed by another author, Snyder, or another group of authors, Snyder et al., and the date. So say I synthesized several ideas from a couple of papers that I've read, I need to be sure that I cite them in the body of my paper. And then if you paraphrase information in several sentences, you have to cite that work at the beginning. So you could say, according to Snyder et al., 2012, and kind of paraphrase that in the sentences that follow. So it's important that you cite that at the beginning so that the person reading your paper understands that the sentences that follow are based on what you cited, the work from Snyder et al. Oops. And then using direct quotes, you can use direct quotes. You need to be very careful about using direct quotes. It's better to take someone else's ideas and paraphrase that than it is to use a lot of direct quotes in the body of your paper. But it is okay to use direct quotes when you want to use that other person's words verbatim. So like I said, it is best to try to paraphrase that rather than using direct quotes. If you do use a direct quotation, you must use an in-text citation to cite the author, the year, and the page number or page numbers. An example in a paper that I did for my prelim was Rush and Sheldon, 2020, I used the definition that they used for coaching, and it was on page 8. Direct quotes that are 40 or more words should be placed in a freestanding block without quotation marks. So anything less than 40 words, you would place in quotation marks and use that citation. But if it's a direct quote of 40 or more, you would put it in the block, freestanding block form. And there's some nice examples of that in the APA 7 manual as well. And when you do that block, the new margin should be indented in half inch from the left margin. And then that parenthetical quotation comes after the period. And so for your reference citations, everything that you cite in the body of your paper needs to be included in your reference section. So if you cite any laws or any type of research papers or any books or information chapters from books, you have to include that in your reference list. So your reference list should match the citations that you have in the body of your paper. And the 4 major elements in your reference list section are the author, the publication date, the title, and the source. So where did it come from? In that reference list, you're going to alphabetize your reference list by the first author's last name. All authors' names should be inverted, so you're going to use the last name, comma, first initial, period, middle initial if they have that, period, and then a comma, and then you're going to list the other authors after that. The author's first and middle names should be written in initials, as I just shared, followed by a period. All authors' names should be separated by a comma and a space. And then you're going to use that ampersand before the last author's name. So in a work that has 3 or more authors, you're going to use that ampersand before the last author's name. And if an author has multiple works, so in a paper I did, I used several papers written by Sam Odom. I had to list his earliest publications first. And so there are some changes in the references with moving from the APA 6 to the APA 7. And I put, Dr. Root sent me this meme that was actually, I had to track down where it came from on Instagram, and it says, too many authors to cite? No problem at all. And so we have been saved a little bit until you get to your reference list. So it used to be in APA 6, you listed, I believe it was the first 6 authors if there were 20 authors or more, and then you use the ellipsis, and then you would list the last author. Well, now that's different. You have to list up to 20 authors of a particular source. So if there are 21 or more authors, you use an ellipsis after the 19th author, and then the final author's name. I'm sorry, with no ampersand. And then another change with APA 7, if you were referencing a book, you used to put the publisher location. So if the book was published in New York, you would put that location. You no longer have that for a book citation in your references. And I've got some examples at the end of this module. The digital object identifiers, DOIs, and URLs are now presented as hyperlinks. So for your electronic sources. So whenever you have a reference, it's important that you put that hyperlink so that others can find where you were able to find those resources. And that label DOI is no longer used. We used to say DOI, and then we would list where the source came from. And then the label retrieved from is only used when a retrieval date is provided. Instead, you would use the website name. So here's just an example of the citation for a peer-reviewed article. This has 2 authors followed by the date, the name of the of the research article, where it was located, the page numbers, and then followed by the location of the source. And again, here's the citation example for a book. It no longer has that it was where Brooks Publishing was located. And then here's an example citation for law. And you're also going to put the website where you were able to access the law in your citation. Here's another video that you can watch that talks about in-text citation. I think it's about a 5-minute, 6-minute video. So you can scan the QR code here and pause and watch that video. And then I've included some writing resources. These have just been invaluable to me as a graduate and doc student. I did not know about some of them until later on. The first is the FSU Writing Center. Is really the Reading and Writing Center. It's available to all Florida State students. You can schedule an appointment with someone and they can help you with your written projects, and it should say papers. I have that wrong, sorry. Projects and papers, and the link for that is included. And then Grammarly is, they offer either a free or paid subscription that is downloaded from the internet. You upload your Word document into Grammarly and it checks for spelling errors, punctuation errors, run-on sentences, use of passive voice. It also looks at some of your citation errors. So if you use et al. Period, but forget to put your comma before the date, it'll capture those kinds of errors. And then you can download your edited version that you can submit to your professor. So it's just really important that when you present a paper or turn in a paper to your professor, that it is neatly done and it is well done and it has been checked for grammar and spelling errors. Don't rely on just the grammar and spelling check within your Word document because a lot of times those errors get overlooked. I think Grammarly, when I did the year subscription, I think it was about $80 for a year subscription. So, I mean, it's a feasible amount, and it really has been very, very helpful. And I don't get any money for them saying that this is a good source. So, for your citation support, Purdue OWL is, they have a writing lab. That's a free online resource. Sometimes you have to kind of weed through some of the ads, but it can help you with any questions you have with APA 7 citation. There's also a citation machine that you can choose if you want to cite a journal article, a book, or a website, and you plug in the information. It will help you with your citation, and you can copy that and paste it into your reference list. And I've included two different websites. The first one is, you'll see the citation machine is in there, and then another is just some additional resources that you can use that can help you with APA 7 format. And then the FSU library, our search, and I'm not going to use the right term, but the search engine now that we use through the library has changed. The format has changed. So we now have the citation guide, and there's also a citation generator. So you can choose the format, which you would choose APA 7. Just be very careful when you copy and paste that into your reference list. I did notice that there were some errors as I copied and pasted that from the library into my paper. So it's important that you go back and check your formatting. But through the FSU library, you can schedule a consultation with the subject librarian. They were extremely helpful for the prelim paper that I just finished writing this summer. They were able to help me even with like using Zotero to load a lot of the articles that I needed to do my paper. But they can support you with many of your research needs. So, and they're readily available. I don't think there's been one time that I wasn't able to meet with someone via Zoom or get an appointment face-to-face within just a few days. and they're very responsive when you reach out to them via email. So use that as a source. They're very helpful. Another support for online is the APA Style Support. It's the website. I also highly recommend that you have that manual. It goes into a lot more detail than what I was able to cover today. And then I also have a list of my references. I do have to say the Too Many Authors to Cite digital image, I should have a date in here. I tried to reach out to the people on Instagram through their account to get that information, but never heard back. But it is at least here along with their website. So these are the references that I used to generate this module. So I hope this has been helpful to you. You know, and hopefully as you work through the different questions that were embedded, it's going to help you with your next writing project. But do use those resources that are included. They'll help tremendously when you turn in a paper. And good luck to you.